And welcome to this regular Board of Education meeting of the Willoughby East Lake City Schools. It is Monday, November 11th, 2019. We are at 35353 Curtis Boulevard in East Lake, Ohio. Before we get started with our meeting, I would like to have all of us, recognize any of the veterans that are out there in the audience, as today is Veterans Day. So if you are a vet, please stand up so we can recognize you. And thank you so much for your service. With that being said, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll? Here. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please use the microphones. We can't hear you. Thank you.
I know. I didn't think you wanted to hear me say that pledge.
No.
It's okay, though, I get it. Mr. Thompson, we have a speaker?
Yes, our first speaker today is Charles Murphy. He is our assistant superintendent, handles primarily human resources, and that's a big job, along with policies and anything else that I throw at him. Mr. Murphy is going to address our cultural awareness efforts across our district. And Mr. Murphy, can you use the microphone, please?
Sure will.
All right, well, I'll just come up to the middle. All right. Well, good evening. And as Mr. Thompson said, I am here to talk to you a little bit about cultural diversity and some of the initiatives that we have going on in our district right now. And I'm going to focus on three major initiatives that we're doing. The first being actual cultural sensitivity training, and you'll see that right now we're focused on a few buildings, and our intent will be to continue that next year as well in the remaining buildings. Also, in a few buildings, we've done poverty simulation training, and so I'll talk to you a little bit about what that looks like. And finally, our administrators right now are doing a book study on engaging students in poverty, and I'll discuss that with you as well. So first off, our cultural sensitivity training has been done by a company called Coaching to Excellence, and that is led by Carla Chapman. And she's out of the Akron Public Schools, and she and her team have done just a marvelous job. They've been at Grant and Edison in August. They were at Willoughby Middle this past November, and the plan is for them to be at South in January. And the purpose of the training is really to define culture. It's a word that we know pretty well, but it's really hard to define, and also to talk about how culture impacts teaching and learning. Also to increase awareness and understanding of students beyond the academic measures. We're really good at doing the academic measures. We have to look at how we understand and recognize students beyond that. And finally, to reflect on cultural sensitivity, our own, and how it basically increases us as leaders, our abilities, and our roles as leaders, and the impact on that. Some of the key concepts in this training: first of all, culture acknowledges the unique and different ways people come to the table. And once you have an understanding of that, you can best relate to others and have some true and honest dialogue. The second key concept is that there must be this mutual understanding of equality, respect, for there to be a true exchange among people. And so without that exchange isn't as meaningful and doesn't have the depth that it needs to have. And finally, to engage with a culture as a respectful and humble guest, and most importantly, by invitation only. And so that we have to remember when we're working with those that are of a different culture than our own, that engagement comes with an invitation, and we're a guest at that point. And we have to understand that in the way we respond and talk to those from a different culture. So what's next for us in terms of this training? Well, first of all, we have to recognize the importance of acquiring student prior knowledge. We have to recognize the importance of engaging families and communities as part of our culturally responsive practices. We also have to recognize the value of family assets to better engage them in the classroom. And finally, we have to examine curriculum and our supporting materials to identify opportunities to integrate culture right into the classroom. Those opportunities are here in our curriculum materials. We have to recognize that and plan for that, and we'll be so much better off. So one of the questions that was asked at the end of the training to both groups so far is, what will I do differently as a result of this presentation? And I have for you next about 5 different quotes from various educators and what they said. And I just thought these quotes gave you a pretty good feel for what our staff got out of this training. The first one just said, I will reflect on my own biases. Somebody else said, I will ask more questions and try to discuss differences more in class with kids. Someone else mentioned building relationships with students, and more importantly, building a trust. Somebody else mentioned, I will make sure not to cheat my kids by lowering expectations. And finally, somebody said, I will seek to help a child who is struggling by addressing emotional issues before I require him to focus on academics. And I thought these were really insightful comments and very reflective comments that our staff made as a result of this presentation. All right, our poverty simulation is put on by Lakeland Community College. We've had that simulation at Grant, NCI Eastlake and Willoughby, and Willowick Middle School thus far. How does it work? Well, pretty simple. Teachers are broken into groups and they're assigned as a family. And as a family, they're given a packet of resources, and amongst those resources are circumstances that somebody in poverty would be dealing with. And so every 15 minutes during the presentation is a week, and the simulation is for a month's time. And so during that time, families have to work in terms of how do we manage with this amount of money, this amount of time, who's covering daycare, how do I get my kids to the doctor, how do I pay for that, how do I get homework done? You know, all the different things that come up within all of our daily lives, but how do I do it with these circumstances? And so again, you know, what did we learn? Well, first of all, one of the key outcomes to that was that families, meaning the staff, because remember they were families, they learned how to balance life while living in poverty. They also found out that life for some of their students is very different than their own. And I know that sounds very simple, but it is a concept that we tend to forget. And until you have an exercise like that, where you're actually, you know, as best you can simulate being put in those shoes, that really has the impact to really register with some of us. And we discover ways we can structure our practices and procedures to help students in poverty. You know, some things that we do on a day-to-day basis and the way we do them, some of our routines, and we can examine and say, how can we do these things a little bit differently to help all students, including and especially those in poverty. So again, a couple quotes. These quotes are actually from the presenters after working with staff. And they said, you know, one of them was, I think school districts are becoming increasingly aware of the impact the stress of these circumstances have on students in the classroom. And the reason why I included that, I thought that was really important to understand that, first of all, the stress of the circumstances affects students. And when it affects students, it affects on what happens in the classroom and what they're able to do in the classroom. And the second quote says, districts are really dedicated to making sure teachers have the tools they need to help students be positioned for success. And so they were real pleased with the fact that we had gotten involved in these poverty simulations and said it's really important, and they're really pleased with the efforts that we're making, and they understand the impact that it's going to have on students. Okay, finally, the last initiative, the administrative book study. You can see a picture of the book on the screen. It's called Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind. It's by Eric Jensen. And you know, you might say, why are we doing this book study? Well, here's some facts that we got out of the beginning of the book that may or may not surprise you. More than 50% of academic outcomes stem from what the teacher does in the classroom. That is the main focus. And so when you're focusing on students from poverty and how you can do some things differently, that has a major effect. Teaching matters more than any other factor in a student's school years in terms of student achievement. Research says that teaching can completely offset the devastating effects of poverty that it has on academic performance. But here's the key. It takes 5 years of quality teaching to mitigate the effects of poverty. A few more. 70% of all children who do not graduate from high school have spent at least a year living in poverty. So there's a pretty big correlation there. Dropout rate is 50% greater in students from poverty than the rate of students from high-income families. Response to chronic stress. Here we're coming back to that again. Remember that was in the poverty training? Now it's here as well. Response to chronic stress can be misdiagnosed as ADHD. And of course, when you misdiagnose something, you're not going to be very successful at addressing it. And lastly, 75% of high school students reported being bored because the material just wasn't that interesting. So just to give you an idea, a few of the topics from the book, the 7 engagement factors are some of the things that we've talked about, as well as some of the rules of engagement. Again, this book really focuses in on how do you, it's a great book for all students, and that's the beauty of it, but it obviously also focuses on students from poverty. But engagement is the key, and that's the key for all of our students. So engaging for a positive climate, to build cognitive capacity, for motivation and effort, to engage for a deep understanding, not a surface level understanding, and energy and focus. Questions? The administrative, the building principals. Sure.
Mr. Murphy. At this time, I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting on October 14th, 2019. Do I have said motion?
Madam President,
Mrs. Kuczynski.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from October 14, 2019.
Thank you, Mrs. Kuczynski. Is there a second?
Madam President, I will second the motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the meeting of October 14th, 2019. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Perkinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion has carried. Mr. Perkinson, it's now time for your report.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. The first item for your consideration is the financial report ending October 31st. Information can be found in Exhibit A. The next item for your consideration are the amended appropriations as of October 31st. Those amendments can be found under Exhibit B. Item C for your consideration is for the County Auditor's Office. This is the Certificate of Estimated Resources. That information can be found on that item. Item D for the board's consideration, purchase orders and blanket certificates. There is one purchase order for your consideration and 5 then and nows, and then there are 2 purchase orders, both related to the Crossroads program, which that's going to be taken out of the wellness funds from the state of Ohio with respect to these particular requisitions. Item E for your consideration, advance of funds. This is just one. It's to the food service fund for $27,000. Item F, return of advances. There is one. Is the amount of $140,000 to return to the general fund. Item G for the board's consideration, transfer of funds. This is $50,000 to the employee termination benefit fund. Item H, there are two grants for the board's consideration. One is Title I, and the other one is a school safety grant. Item I, gifts and donations. Many organizations donated generously to the school districts, and those donations are listed under item I. And lastly, for the board's consideration, item J, student activity purpose goals and proposed budgets for the current school year. And those conclude my reports, Mrs. Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. It's now time for the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. I'll start with questions and answers from our last board meeting. Stacy McQuiggan spoke, and she brought up her main concerns were that families at North weren't sure exactly where to go in terms of reunification. Should we go into a lockdown and move out of the building? And they did not know what to do in an Alice drill. So safety, in terms of safety, Alice drill lockdown and evacuation drills were held in all schools during the month of October. Police were present and made suggestions. They will also review all of our safety teams in quarterly meetings. Students in the new buildings, both North, South, and Longfellow, obviously are learning some new patterns, and they had opportunities to review those new procedures. North went fairly well, reported a few minor issues. South, students in the old auditorium, we're calling it the theater, and what you might know it as the LGI, those students that were moved to that space were not able to hear the announcements. So had that been an actual occurrence, that would have been very problematic. So we're fortunate that we did the drill and discovered that they could not hear announcements coming from the high school PA system. That has been fixed, and there were some concerns with the ability to lock doors, and that has also been addressed. At Longfellow, students and teachers had the opportunity to review locations used for evacuations and reunification at the school, and some changes were made as a result of those. So what we will do moving forward in the spring, we will do another lockdown drill where we will evacuate the buildings, actually move to our reunification points, take attendance once again, and then move back in. And while that does take some time, I think it's a critical step in making sure that we can effectively vacate a building. And we did all of our buildings in under 3 minutes last time. But we did discover some problems. We bottlenecked at certain points, which if there was, for example, an active shooter, and there's more reasons than that to evacuate a building for sure, but if that were a reason that we evacuated the building, that would create an opportunity, if there were a shooter available, that would have a pond of students all together, which is not effective. And it also slowed us down getting to our reunification point. So those things have been tweaked. We meet quarterly with our police chiefs and fire chiefs, and we review those, and they're extremely helpful in helping us decide what to do. April Spiegel spoke as well. If you recall, for those of you that have been here, it was a very emotional presentation over a couple of months, wanting to know about the tree, if you recall that, and the tree that was dedicated to her daughter but was lost, couldn't be moved in the construction of North High School, moving to its new location, which was very, very difficult for everyone, and especially her. I think most importantly her. But we did supply her with the green. I'm not sure. Is April? Are you here? No, okay. We did supply her the information that she wanted, which was the report from the arborist that the tree could not be moved because it was too large. It was a 22 or 23-year-old tree. So we have made some provisions for her. We're doing a plaque for her in our memorial garden that is being constructed at North High School now. And one of the things we added was her daughter was very much into butterflies. So we fabricated a butterfly and we're attaching that to her plaque. That was what Mom wanted. And then we didn't do a tree because that's not what she wanted, and you can probably understand why she maybe didn't want to take the chance on a tree dying or whatever. So that made a lot of sense. And and we changed policy based on what occurred so that it hopefully will never happen again in the future. And Michelle Vogler also spoke. She spoke about, she actually said she didn't need a response, but I thought it was important to note one of the things she said. It's so apropos of where we are at this point. She said, a community is known by its schools that it keeps, if you recall that part of her speech, and I think that's really important at this point. The fourth speaker was Mr. Zurin, and he did not require any feedback. He spoke about creating a capsule. And then Nancy Knack spoke. She read a letter from one of our community residents, and she was giving her opinion about the levy, so thank you, Nancy. And no response was required. And then finally, Andy spoke, and he wanted to know why Soy High School was implemented. And we have 2 brand new high schools and new facilities, and he wanted to know about the elimination of crossroads and why we pay for that, and why our students attend that, and then the supplementals. So I think we've addressed that. I've spoken with Andy. Andy's been diligent about coming to public meetings. Thank you, Andy. And Andy's done exactly what we would hope any citizen would do, has concerns, come and share them, come and be educated, and he's here again tonight, so thank you, Andy. So those are all the Q&As, and then I have a short presentation, Madam President. Before I start, I think I just wanted to touch base with Mr. Murphy, or round back to Mr. Murphy's presentation about what we're trying to tackle in our school district. And I felt like as the leader, I was not prepared to lead this district the best that I could in terms of changing demographics and how am I relating appropriately. And I always thought to myself, well, my roommate in college was Curtis Kaufman. He was the point guard on our basketball team. He was an African-American kid, so I thought, well, that qualifies me. My roommate for 4 years was African-American, so I know all I need to know. Well, that's not true at all. And then I had the experience in 2017 and 18 of going through a national certification program at Howard University. And if those of you that know Howard University, it's an historically black university. I was the only white guy in my cohort of 32. And just that feeling alone of being the only white guy on the campus was an experience that I can't even really describe it. As it turns out, Dr. Renee Willis, who is the superintendent right down the road at Richmond Heights, was also in the program. We were only 2 from Ohio in that program. And so she kind of took me under her wing. And I had one experience where a African-American board member from Durham, North Carolina, I'll never forget her, because I thought she was rude and disrespectful. And I tried to ask a few questions, and I felt like she marginalized me and blew me off and didn't care what I had to say. And I left. As soon as the presentation was over, I left. I went to the airport. I was angry. And as soon as I got to the airport, I called Dr. Willis, and I thought, she's going to back me. She's going to tell me how rude that woman was and support me. I got about a 10-minute lecture. She said, A, you can't act like that just because you're upset. And she said, how do you think I feel every day when I walk into our superintendent's meetings, for example, and I'm the only woman in there, she is, and I'm the only African American in the room. And it was just a aha moment for me about how it must be for her, and then obviously must be for some of our students, how difficult that must be. So we've embarked on this training for all of our staff, and I think Chuck and I, Mr. Murphy and I were at the training at Willoughby Middle for a little while. We went in there just to poke our heads in there, stayed for, I don't know, an hour because it was so good. So I think it's making a difference in our school, so we're trying to do that. Mrs. Warner stole my thunder. I wanted to thank those who served as well, and I do. But I have to say, by complete bias, all you folks in the Air Force and the Navy and the Army and the Coast Guard, you deserve an attaboy. But those Marines, we get 2 attaboys.
Oh.
Don't we? Semper Fi, right, Ken?
Semper Fi. Oh, boy.
Why make cuts now? And some of you have seen this, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This is our 5-year forecast as it currently stands. Now, I've heard some people say, as a result of some of our community meetings, and thank you if you've been to one of our community meetings. There's been a lot of folks there. Thank you. We're getting the feedback that we need. But one of the things I've heard is that we show a positive number in 2021. You got $1.9 million. What's the fuss? That's 8 days worth of operating expenses. 8 days. And to put that in perspective, Mentor Public Schools is sitting on $72 million in cash reserves. Just to put it in perspective. And they're starting deficit spending, and they're already informing their community that they're going to be back on the ballot with those types of cash reserves. So what you're looking at right there is no cuts and no levy passage. This is what if you eliminated Soy High School, no other cuts and no levy passage, you're at $32.7 million on the back end of the 5-year forecast. This is a March levy passage, and I think this is one that's important to look at. It certainly makes our 5-year forecast look healthier, but is that healthy enough? Not even close. So this forecast would force us to be back on the ballot at the latest in fiscal year 22. And I think everyone in this room would agree that passing a levy and making no other provisions, no other reductions, would be a very bad decision to make. This is March levy passage with $2 million in cuts. That's how much we have implemented, $2 million in cuts, and the assumption that House Bill 305 will come to fruition. I have some insight. That's just not off the top of my head. I did speak to Representative John Rogers. He's feeling very confident that House Bill 305 will go through. That's about $1.3 million a year in additional funding for the school district. So that is helpful, but it is certainly not the answer. So here you see March levy passage, $2 million in cuts, and House Bill 305. Some people have said, well, why did you make cuts now? Our appropriations and budget for this school year were predicated on a levy passage in 2019. That means you get a half collection in January 2020. The difference between collecting in November and collecting in March is that we will be in we are now in an entire year longer in deficit spending. Meaning that's adding a little over $8 million to our deficit because we're in deficit spending. Meaning making our levy that we pass in March doesn't do as much as it would have if it would have passed in November. So this is our 5-year forecast, and this is still probably not pushing us out as far as people would like. But that's our 5-year forecast, if we pass a levy, $2 million in cuts in House Bill 305. So if you stack them all up, that's what it looks like if you look at all of them at the same time. That's why we're making difficult decisions. And I think it's important to know, well, I've had people say, well, why didn't you cut into staff? Why didn't you make staff cuts? This is why. This is the front page from 2011 article. This is a summary of all the cuts that were made in 2012. 7 full-time equivalent administrators, 50 teachers, 7.5 secretaries, 5 custodians, and 7 food service workers. Since then, we've also outsourced transportation, outsourced management of food service, and cut 9 more secretaries since then. On top of this, the unions also took significant concessions in 2012. Our teachers, our staff, not all just teachers, but everyone, administrators as well, paid 2% of the share of the premium of their health care. Now, I would submit to you, none of you have 2% share as in the public sector, and we understand that and know that. So we negotiated to go from 2% to 15% share. Last negotiations, just a few months ago, we went from 15% to 20% share. Our insurance plan design changes were, and by the way, that saved $2.1 million in 2012. Our insurance plan design changes, which have not come back, they stayed the same. That saved $2.4 million a year. Staff took step freezes and 0% pay increases in 2012 and 2013. In addition, they worked 3 days for no pay. Coupled with the staff reductions, that's about $14 million totally out of the budget. Those cuts have largely remained, when I say largely, over 90% of those cuts have remained in place, plus additional cuts since then. There's nothing left to cut. The only thing left to cut, if you look at what we proposed in our Phase 3 cuts, are cutting programs. Now it's programs. So a lot of folks have said, how did you come up with the cuts that you came up with and implemented so far? Look, there's no rhyme or there's no easy solution to it. There's no right or wrong answer, in my view. There's no, if you look at any of them in isolation, they make no sense. Make no sense. They're all bad for kids. Every one of these cuts is bad for kids. But they were equally divided. I've heard a lot of talk that, well, it's not fair. Depending on who you talk to, one side thinks athletics took too much, and then you talk to another side, one side thinks band or choir or the arts took too much. This is how it broke down. All middle school athletic programs cost $332,460. Thank you. It's a huge number. Because what people don't factor in I've heard people say, well, let's do pay to participate. The pay to participate fees would be astronomical to cover these costs. These are costs that people aren't thinking about. Most people think about, well, we got to pay for the officials, but we got to pay for the officials, the coaches' retirement. We have to pay for trainers. We have to pay for liability insurance. We have to pay for buses. We have to pay for custodians to work overtime. The list goes on and on. Freshman athletic programs are $100,000, and that totals $432,000. Non-athletics, the band and class trips are $137,000. Non-athletic supplementals are $287,570, and that totals $424,600. So from a financial perspective, it was equitable. From being palatable, none of it's palatable. So if we have of the cuts, obviously that's a little over $800,000, $850,000. We made $2 million in cuts. So there's another 1.2 million in cuts that doesn't really impact students directly, at least not yet, not right off the get-go, not as much. It affects, like for example, the other half of this would be Soy High School. That affects Soy freshmen for sure, and future Soy students without question. But most of those kids, obviously we have 3 more grades that aren't there at this point. So there's another 1.2 million that I left on the table. So if you take those cuts, which I think are the majority of the cuts that are causing people pain, causing students to be upset, and justifiably so. If you go with a March levy passage, 1.2 million in cuts, and House Bill 305, we're back on the ballot in 2023, folks. And I think most of you would agree that's not a good formula. So whatever we bring back, whatever cuts we bring back, first of all, it's not even an item of discussion without a March levy passage. And then secondly, hello, welcome. Secondly, whatever we take out, we've got to figure out a way to make up. We've got to figure out a way to make that back up. So why are we on the ballot so frequently? Why do the numbers go down like that? How many of you remember 1976? I don't think you do. A few of us. 1976. If I can take you back there in 1976, the economy good or bad? It was horrible. Economy was in horrible shape. Remember the lines just to get gasoline? You had to wait in lines to get gas. Inflation was at about 20%. Today inflation is slightly below 2%. So on paper, what happened to the cost of goods to buy? When inflation is high, what happens to the cost of goods? They rise. This one a lot of people get wrong. What happens to the value of your property on paper?
Goes up.
It goes up. It goes up. Prior to 1976, to the passage of House Bill 920, that meant that as your value of your home rose, so did your taxes. So while the economy was in shambles, schools were rich because they were collecting all this additional money at rates that they had never expected to collect money. So Voinovich, who was George Voinovich, who later becomes governor, at that time was a state representative, and he crafted House Bill 920. And what House Bill 920 says, well, let me back up a bit. Would you agree that no matter how conservative the school is, our expenses will rise? I mean, we can argue about the degree in which it rises and the speed in which it rises, but there is no way we can hold forever. Our expenses rise. Fuel, electricity, buses. You can't, our cost of health insurance, to renew our health insurance, our liability insurance. You know how those people are that own the insurance companies. Right, Mike? Just a bunch of rich guys. But all of that increases. And you can't flatline employees forever. So what House Bill 920 does, it freezes revenue at the rate in which it was passed. So when we pass this levy, it stays flat forever. And there's two words or two descriptions of millage. There's voted millage and there's effective millage. Because what happens is over the course of time, we will not need 4.99 mils to collect $8.5 million, which is what it would do today. Eventually, you won't need 4.99 mils. And the county auditor will do what? Reduce the millage. So then you have what's voted millage, and then you have what's effective millage, what it's actually collecting at. And the number goes down and down and down and down until you pass a new levy. So this is why school districts are in the perpetual cycle that all school districts are in. Unless you're Perry, they got all that money from the nuclear power plant. But aside from an anomaly, that's an outlier. Aside from a district like that, this is the reality of all public schools. We have to be on the ballot. There's no other way. And I would submit to you, could any of you at your current income and your current standard of living stay frozen for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? We did for 7 years. We went 7 years without a tax increase for the purpose of general operating. If you had to do that in your home, you would have to make significant cuts. So what do our cuts look like? They look like the cuts that have most of you sitting in this room right now. That's what it looks like. So levy calculations. The levy, what it says on here is very confusing. It says an additional tax for the benefit of Willoughby East Lake City School District for the purpose of current expenses at a rate not exceeding 4.99 mils for each $1 valuation, which amounts to 49.9 cents for each $100 evaluation for a continuing period of time commencing 2019, first due in calendar year 2020. If you do the math on that, that's $500. You do the math, that's $500. But we're saying it's $174. What's going on? Well, what they don't do on the ballot language, there's assessed valuation and market valuation. You are technically, all of us are only technically taxed on 35% of our market value. And they don't do that calculation on the ballot. So it comes to $174.65 per $100,000. So we wanted to have some proof so that you would believe us. This is a letter from the county auditor, Lake County auditor. It is to Mr. Parkinson. It says, real property tax collection. Dear Mr. Parkinson, below you will find the procedure for manually counting real estate tax bill. Fair market value, $100,000 times 35% to arrive at the assessed value equals $35,000. To get the tax, move the decimal in the tax rate or millage 3 places to the left, multiplied by the assessed value using 4.99 mil levy. The calculation would look like this. 35,000 times 0.00499 is $174.65. It's exactly the information that we put out. Pay to participate, we talked about that a little bit already, but the challenge is for pay to participate. So let's say, there are several of them, but let's say somebody's got connection to Lubrizol, and Lubrizol is going to make a huge donation for that particular sport. Problem is, unless it's enough money to pay for all the sports, it creates inequities in the Willoughby East Lake family on who gets to participate and who doesn't. Secondly, there's Title IX requirements. Can't have more boys sports than girls sports or vice versa. So those have to be balanced. We have negotiated agreements, and I completely support and back the union on this. That is, when a coach doesn't get paid and a volunteer comes in and replaces them, it's called supplanting. And it's unfair because the unions give up pay raises, give up different things in negotiations to get those supplementals. So they're not going to sit back and allow us to bring in volunteers so we don't have to make a payment to them. And they would file a grievance and they would win. And then secondly, just for you to consider, if the school district somehow, if the parents come up with all the money to do it, A, is it sustainable? And then B, what would the general electorate respond with? Now, if you can, that's right. So type of levy in March that the school board is going to have to make. You don't see it on the ballot right now, but they are on the, as a resolution. I'll explain that in a minute. Types of levies that we're considering, that the board has to consider. A fixed dollar for an indefinite period of time appears as millage. An emergency operating, and by the way, continuing levy means it continues in perpetuity. It's never back on the ballot to be renewed. An emergency operating levy, which is primarily what the district has used since 1976, is a fixed dollar amount for a fixed amount of time. It must be renewed by the voters, and it appears as dollars. Time frame is 5 or 10-year time periods. So factors to consider that the board has to consider when making this very difficult decision. Emergency levy or continuing operating levy. I want to show you what the projected election cycle looks like for Willoughby Eastlake right now. In fiscal year 20 would be a new levy. In 22, 2 renewals. In 23, renewal. In 24, new money, renewal. 28, new money, renewal. 29, 2 renewals. 30, renewal. 32, renewal, renewal. 33, new money, renewal. 34, renewal, renewal. 38, love to be the superintendent this year, pass new money and pass 2 renewals. 39, renewal, renewal. Every time we're on the ballot in odd years, it's $30,000 to $90,000 every time you're on the ballot. And also this graph assumes that every levy passes on the first try. So the impacts are the cost of the ballot initiatives, which pales in comparison to the impact on our credit report. Just like you as an individual receive a credit report with a number, the school district receives a credit report with a series of letters. Our school district has been downgraded because Moody's is a rating agency. Mr. Parkinson and I presented there 4 times. 4 times we've gone to Chicago. We make what I think is pretty good presentations. We do the best we can, but it always goes back to the same thing, which we have in writing, and if anyone wants to see it. It says from Moody's, Moody's says, your levy renewals make you a risk. Because at any point, a levy renewal could be non-renewed, and it could be taken away, and so that makes you a credit risk. Secondly, the more times you fail levies, the more of a risk you are as well. So we went back to our bankers, and we asked them to calculate what this is costing taxpayers with our bond issue, and it's roughly $6 million in extra interest payments that we shouldn't have to make. If you didn't hear him, he said we're on the precipice of being downgraded again because of our last 2 levy failures. But there's also this thing called reality. We were defeated in August 2019, 80-20, and we were defeated in November 2019, 53.5 to 46.5. I've had people say, why did you try to sneak the levy through in August? There was absolutely no attempt to sneak a levy through. What transpired? Why are we in the position we're in? We're in the position we're in because in 2005, the state switched to the commercial activity tax, dropping what was known as the tangible personal property tax, which was a tax on business inventory. We used to receive about $8.5 million a year from TPP. In 2005, when the switch was made, we were told that we would not be held liable, we would be reimbursed, and it became known as the TPP reimbursement, which occurred for many years. And then Governor Kasich came into office, and Governor Kasich does not like TPP reimbursement. So he started to phase it out. We knew that. We knew that. We're budgeting for it. We know he's phasing it out. But he was phasing it out over almost 17 years to phasing it out over 3. So our collections are
$597,000 this year, $304,000 next year, 0 the year after, and in perpetuity.
So to go from that being phased out over a long period of time being phased out over 3 years was a killer. All our levy, if you look at our levy, 4.99 mils, we're asking for $8.5 million. That is replacing simply what we lost. It's not adding new programming, it's not adding frills, it's not adding anything. It's keeping us status quo. So the board has a very difficult decision. So back, did we try to sneak it through? What happened was, by time we realized the final announcements of what this impact was going to be and what our new collections were going to be, it was too late to get on the May ballot. So our choice was go in August or wait and go this past November. But what do we know since 1959? Every new money levy in this district, with the exception of our 2015 bond issue, every new money levy has done what the first time? Failed. Every time. You know the cuts, you're feeling them and you're angry about them, and so am I. And they're here and they're upon us. How would you have felt if we knew, set on it, knew the first time it would probably fail, but the first time we go on the ballot is November? That's what we were faced with. And why does that matter? Again, remember, 2019, anytime you pass in 2019, when do we begin to collect? January 2020. So now we don't begin collections until when, at the earliest? January 21. So the decision not to pass the levy, and by the way, how many people made, what was the percentage of people that made that decision out of all the possible voters in this community? About 24%. About 24% of the community actually made the decision. The other 76% either voted yes or didn't vote at all. So the board has to make a tough decision. We have to make $2 million in cuts. I think you can see that from the projections. We have to make $2 million in cuts. But it'll be $8.5 million in cuts if we don't pass this levy at some point in 2020. We have to pass in March. So the reason the board does not have a resolution on the board agenda tonight is because they want to get the information from the community. So one of the things that I'm asking of you is, one of the things we did on Sunday, and some on Friday, but a lot on Sunday. We were here for 3 hours on Sunday, 300 people in this room, and we're trying to brainstorm what could we do? What are our priorities to bring back? What are some different ideas that we could do to lessen the impacts of these budget reductions? We're going to have another one on Thursday. So if you didn't get a chance to come on Sunday, I personally invite you and encourage you to come and bring your ideas with you on Thursday at 6 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. We're going to hold 2 meetings Thursday night. We have a survey, and I'm going to review where we're at with our survey up to this point in just a minute. But take the survey. You can go to supportweschools.org and take that survey if you haven't done so yet. We have about 1,300 people, I believe, that have taken the survey by the time it was printed today. So again, that levy, the invitation to that levy committee meeting is Thursday. It's Thursday, November 14th at 6 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. and it'll be right here in this room. If you weren't able to attend on Sunday. Please visit supportweschools.org. I don't even know how many questions we had on Sunday. It was a lot of questions, and we answered the majority of them. We didn't answer them all because after about 3 hours, I was I was gassed. And I think most of the people in the audience were gassed at that point too. But we took every single question, we put it on our website. We didn't skip hard questions. Every question, we put it on our website and we answered it. So you can go in the you ask, we tell section of you ask, we answer, and under supportweschools.org, you'll find all those questions and every one of our answers to those questions. I know it's long, I know that, and I appreciate your patience as we're moving through this. The last thing I want to do is just share, if I can, the results of our survey. And this will give you an idea of the survey questions that we are asking. So we asked, basically, who are you, to get the demographic. Could you hold that for me, please? The demographic of who we are. And so far, the majority of people that have responded are parents. But we really need to push this out. If you have people on your Facebook or people, we need to get more than just responses from our parents. We need to get responses from a variety of people. I believe the levy should be, pivotal question, I believe the levy should be, so far, a renewal levy, one that is renewed every 10 years, or X number of years, is 50.86. Those that say it should be a continuing are 48.01% from our survey respondents. And believe me, you want a voice and you want to have an impact on what the board does, vote. Vote. Give us your feelings. Where do you look to find information? So far, the majority of the people, 51%, say the school district website, 22% say Facebook. We've asked, when looking for a second, when you go to your second spot, what do you go to? It's Facebook and website reversed. I've heard of the levy website. 61.73 have heard of it. 38.2% have never heard of it. So we need to spread that to those that haven't seen it. All the information they would need is on that website. The most common reason I heard from others regarding a yes vote. So these are the reasons people say they voted yes. They had a child in the district. They believe it is, which is 53%. They believe it's the right thing to do, 18%. And they want to keep the community stable, 17%. Here's what I can tell you about parents. If the only people that vote for the levy are our parents, that's about 25% of our community, folks. You can't win with parents alone. I voted yes because I have children in the district, 46%. I believe it's the right thing to do and to keep the community stable. The most common reason they heard while others voted no, the length and term of the levy was 37.95%. The levy was going to cost too much, 30.3%, and then the rest were low. But the majority of almost 70% was length of the term and cost of the levy. I believe people voted no because, and this was their second response, what was their second answer, and it was just those in reverse again. In order to have people learn more about support the levy, we need more. And it was community meetings, 21%, speeches and endorsements from prominent community members, 16.3%, mailings, 15.22%. Where do you think the money comes to run a levy? Where does it come from? Donations. Can you use general fund money? No. So that was second option. And then we asked them to rank and order of the cuts, what's the most important to return? And it was spread all over the place, or it currently is spread all over the place. The leader by a very small margin is busing at 11.31%, followed by middle school sports at 10.84%, followed by all supplementals non-athletic, 11.13%, middle school sports, 10.8%. Basically what you can glean from here is the answer is we want everything back. Essentially the answer, which I get. I do too. But there's got to be $2 million in cuts. So I appreciate your time and understanding as we go through this. I know I confidently speak for the board and for the entire administration when I say nobody wants these cuts. Nobody wants to see these cuts implemented. But we have tough work to do, and we need your help to do it in the best way possible. So I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
You say the 3 reasons we all agree upon.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so what Mrs. Warner asked me to share was, well, how did you arrive at the cuts? What criteria did you use? So we met and we had a work session with the school board, I don't know, a month or so ago, maybe a little longer than that now, maybe it's been 6 weeks ago. And the criteria was 3 things. 3 things. First and foremost, circle the wagons around, protect core academic classes. And there's not cuts to core academic classes. Second was protect students the best we can from an academic perspective. And we did that the best we can. We don't have class reductions. We're not offering AP courses, for example. The third was hit the $8.5 million mark. First mark hit the $2 million mark. Phase 3 cuts, which are available and are out there, hit the $8.5 million or $8.3 million target. So that's was the list of priorities that were used in trying to come up with that amount of money. And please, I ask you to keep in mind, the cuts from 2012 are relevant because there's no low-hanging fruit. It's already been done. It's already been done. And then more cuts since then. So, thank you for your time.
That can be a resolution.
It's now time for the superintendent's resolutions. And I think we need Patrick? No?
We do need you, Patrick.
Oh, boy.
Thank you, Madam President. Board, for item for our resolutions for your consideration are the November budget reductions. For those of what we're talking about are the reductions that equal the $2 million.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You have heard the superintendent's recommendation. What is the board's pleasure?
Madam President,
Dr. Beal.
with a lot of sadness, but I do have to make the motion to pass item 5A, November budget.
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Is there a second?
Madam President,
Mr. Jones.
I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. It has been moved and seconded that we approve item 5A, November budget reductions. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Zern.
So, we're correctly having 2 community meetings on Thursday. I propose that this get temporarily taken off so we can listen to that community meeting. What I have a problem with is the resource officers and Crossroads. I will tell you, I have a SOI student, and I think all these cuts are very significant, but especially busing, there's none of these that don't impact somebody here. But school resource officers, I think, are pivotal, and our Crossroads is necessary, just as basic stuff. Because without that, if kids' mental health is not stable, and the school resource officer is not there, that's a huge worry to me. It really, really is. That came up at the community meetings on both nights. That came up Friday, and it came up also yesterday. And I think it's very significant, and I personally would like to hear what those community meetings, what those ideas are on Thursday before I say yes or no to this. So that's where I am, and that's the merit of why I'm saying it. And it's not selfishly because I have kids in the district. I'm looking at the most important things out of these lists that impact everybody, school safety and mental health concerns. So I'm not sure if anybody else has any other thoughts, but.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Anyone else?
While I concur, Mrs. Zern, the challenge, of course, will be whatever we take off the list, and I think you would agree that myself and Mrs. Bowers, are you here? Yeah. Mrs. Bowers especially, but the both of us put a tremendous amount of work into bringing Crossroads here and trying to make it an effective program. If you surveyed the teachers and the staff, I think the first thing they would tell you is the biggest need they have in the classroom is mental health. So I don't think anyone disagrees. The challenge will be replacing it. So I believe that's a little over $300,000 for Crossroads. And so if you bring Crossroads in, you have to do something that takes $300,000 out. That's our challenge.
Mr. Parkinson, we need to have a discussion on voting, whether we take this resolution out, or we just vote on the resolution. I just want to make sure.
Madam President, if you're comfortable with this, I think it's important that we're 5-0. I think it's also important that the concern is that the cuts are in place and they're not board approved. So that's the challenge, but I would still submit, I would rather table a resolution and make sure all the board is comfortable voting before I try to force, or not me personally, but with the agenda itself, force Mrs. Zurin into a position she's not comfortable, or anyone else who didn't speak. So, but we would have to have a special board meeting to get this done very soon. We have a resolution that needs to be passed to be on the ballot. Anyway, we could do it on that night.
Okay, and my comment is just that we have been talking about this for a long time, and I have not heard this before, so I was a little surprised, and everybody's entitled to their opinion, but as the time we have been talking about all of these things, again, I reiterate just for myself, I don't want to do this either. This is something I never thought would happen. I know I got an email from someone saying, I thought you were kidding. I wasn't, we were not kidding, and we really hoped it wouldn't happen. And it's awful, and I am with you all, but to find the money somewhere else is going to be tough. And we don't want to, I do not want to touch academics, because that's why we have a school, is for academics. Listen, my kids went here, my kids played sports, my kids did National Honor Society, they did all the things that your kids did, and I appreciated it so much, and I know you do too. But we're not in that situation right now to have that luxury. So agreeing with Mr. Thompson, we will table this, but we will have to have a special meeting of the board to pass this resolution or not, and also to put the levy back on the ballot as either a continuing levy or a emergency levy.
Thank you, Madam President. Item B for your consideration is a payroll update. What this is two individual teachers who had time that should have moved them on the salary schedule, and it was just an oversight, and so it is to make the correction. It's not paying them any additional funds, it's simply paying them what they were supposed to be paid.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You have heard the superintendent's recommendation. What is the board's pleasure?
Madam President,
Mr. Jones.
I motion to approve item 5B, payroll update.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there a second? Mrs. Zurin? Oops, nope. Mrs. Perchinsky, I'm sorry. I don't even know where I am.
You're now me. I make a motion, or I second that motion to pass 5B payroll update.
Thank you, Mrs. Perchinsky. Sorry about that. It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 5B payroll update. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Krasinski?
Yes.
Mrs. Zern?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Mrs. Warner?
Yes.
Motion has carried. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Madam President. Item C for your consideration is a parent-guardian transportation agreement in lieu of appropriate busing being cost-effective. We sometimes go into parent-guardian transportation agreements. Item D for your consideration is a special services agreement. This is our agreement with CVEC, which provides services for our students. Item E for your consideration is an overnight out-of-district field trip request. This particular field trip has, prior to the November vote, had been completely 100% paid for. And it's non-refundable as well. Item F for your consideration is the adoption of the following policies. Again, I said it earlier, but thank you, Mr. Murphy, for your leadership and effort on making sure those policies are updated. And item G for your consideration is the personnel agenda. Again, all these folks are subject to, they won't become full-time employees until we receive final satisfactory records from the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, the Ohio Department of Education, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We move to community engagement, and this is the time where we have public participation. Are there any people who wish to speak, Mr. Parkinson? 4 individuals. Okay, so we will not suspend our rules for tonight. We will continue to have a 3-minute, you'll have a 3-minute time to come up and share your views. We ask that you state your name and your address and your topic of conversation. You'll have 3 minutes to give that information. We do not banter, we just listen. And then if you have a question in your concerns, Mr. Thompson, you can check the little box that says you want an email or you want to answer soon, and then Mr. Thompson will again answer them at the December meeting. So again, this is your opportunity to speak, and we are here to listen.
I am so sorry. No, I won't.
Mrs. Chrissy Klonda?
Hi, it's actually Chrissy Cloda, so it's a U, not an N. My name's Chrissy Cloda. I am a parent in the Willoughby East Lake District. I've actually lived here almost my entire life, almost 40 years. Graduated from East Lake North. I did all the extracurriculars that I could, and Key Club, and National Honor Society, and all of those things, so it's heartbreaking to have these cuts, and I know you all feel the same way. I have a kiddo that was pulled mid-season from an activity that their team went to the state, went to the state competition, made it that far the last 2 years. It's just really unfortunate to see these things happening in our district. And so what I did on Wednesday morning, because probably like many of you had a terrible night of sleep, and was like, we've got to do something about this. We need to do something about it locally, but we need to also fix what's going on in the state with the funding for schools. So I went on Facebook, I created a group on Facebook, you can search for it and ask to join, and I'll approve you, of course. It's called Ohioans for Improved School Funding, and it's really those the two goals are for us here locally, the Willoughby East Lake District. There's other people from other districts too that we can learn from, and hopefully they can learn from what we're doing if it works. So we can share ideas there, and so the goal is to help us locally, of course, with the March levy and then any things that are going to come after that. And then also to help make improvements at the state level. So we've already begun sharing how is the state funding schools. It was found to be unconstitutional 22 years ago, and we're pretty much in the same position. So we need some major changes at the state level, and so we've started to educate ourselves on how that funding works. And we've also been sharing some representatives, people that we can reach out to, Congress people, that we can email, that we can call, that we can start to hopefully, obviously we want to get House Bill 305 passed, but also I think starting to look at, what are other states doing that's more equitable and a better way to fund schools. So that, I wanted to invite you, if you're on Facebook, to join that group. And we're keeping it positive. We may have differences in what we post and what we share and in our comments, but in a respectful way to others. And so hopefully we will continue to do that with your input. So please join the group, Ohioans for Improved School Funding, and let me know if you have any questions. I'm also I've been involved in the levy committee for, I'd say at least 6 years, if not more. Some of the levies that we've passed, the bond issue, the grassroots efforts that we did there. And so we've had some huge tasks in front of us before, and we've been successful. So I know we can do it again.
Mr. Michael McLaughlin.
Really, I'm going to follow that? All right. Can I just stand right in front of the speaker?
Yes, if you want to.
Okay, so I came to this meeting just for a couple of different reasons. A, I wanted to really hear about the levy. And also because I was sick of reading Facebook. There were so many freaking people that, and I'm wondering, how didn't this levy pass? Everyone was all up in rage, and it's like, oh my God, my kids aren't going to be able to do this. The cuts have been out there for months, and everyone thought it was just a scare tactic. And I'm thinking, well, you know what? They wouldn't be promoting it like that if it was just a scare tactic. Someone's got a bluff. Clearly, we weren't playing chicken here. So I wanted to come and just see how much of the information was legit and how much wasn't. And great presentation. And what also really torqued me was there were so many people that were tossing so many of these folks under the bus. Steve, why doesn't he give up his car? Why doesn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why did we build
negative things about me?
Yeah, like one or two. It was, the haircut, they didn't like your shoes. But it was one of those things where, why did we build these beautiful schools? And I've gotten to work with Steve, I've gotten to work with some of the members of the board, and these guys are very focused on the students. It's not one of those things where they're just spending money willy-nilly. There is a vision out there, and the vision is to take care of our kids. I myself, all of my kids went through South. I went through South. I grew up here. I'm 50 years old, and I literally live 3/4 of a mile from where I grew up. So all my kids went through the same schools I went. They got to play sports. They got to do everything that I didn't do because I'm not a sports guy. But they had the opportunity to do that, and I think everyone needs that opportunity. But what I don't understand is 25% of us got out and freaking voted. I mean, that's disgusting. And yeah, it's $8.1 million, but it's 8.1 over 5 years. I mean, that's what we're going to be short. So yeah, is it going to be infinitum? The levy is going to be there? Who really cares? You know what? The great big scheme of things is it's a little bit of money. It's $170. There's times that I'm sure some of you guys go out and spend $175 on a dinner, and you don't even remember it the next day. These are your kids. So it's one of those things where not only the parents need to vote, but you know what? You need to start talking. And when you hear stupid stuff coming out of people's mouths, like giving up a car, or why did we build the School of Innovation? And these people have never been to the School of Innovation. If you guys have a chance to go through it, you will be freaking amazed. Or NCI West, or NCI Willoughby. They are amazing facilities. And you know what? This is what's going to set your kids up to get a job down the road. And that's how you do it. This isn't, we don't get to sit there and 1 + 1 = 2 anymore. We are going up against kids that are so freaking smart, it's pathetic, and we need to place our children in a really good light. And that's all I've got to say. Thanks, guys.
Probably getting, Mrs. Shally Seacrest? Shaley, I'm sorry. sorry.
So my name is Shaylee Sechrist. I am a student at North High School, and I know that a lot of the people here know I'm going to be preaching to the choir with my next few statements, but I wanted to show a little bit more of the insight of an actual student who is going through these cuts. So since I started elementary school, or middle school, have done all I can to be involved in the schools as much as I can. I was in NJHS, I did newspaper, I was in jazz band, I got into high school and I joined choir and drama, and I have been included in so many different of these programs that seeing all of these cuts has been very difficult. I know that specifically theater, I found what I want to do for the rest of my life within that club, and I was student directing the show at North, and we stopped midway through the production. So we had basically everything done except for finishing touches and building, like the last of the set building and props, and we were supposed to perform in December, and it's gone, even though we've known about what these cuts were going to be, and everyone was believing that these things were not actually going to be cut immediately, and I wanted to explain that, like, it happened. Like, I had drugged multiple people, maybe not entirely willingly, into that club so they could try it out, and one of my good friends joined this club and found something that he loves so much that he never had something like that before. He never was included in any sort of extracurriculars before this year, and he finally found something, and he got a lead, first ever audition, and it was ripped away within 2 weeks. That's wrong wording, sorry. Within a few weeks of the performance preparation. And so seeing all of these things, I have another friend who has been in choir all of her years in high school. We have gotten this close to getting to states each year. This year, our 8th period chorale, we changed the name. This is the group that would be going to states, if any of the groups would have went to states. And now we're not able to go to this performance. I just want the people who didn't get out to vote and the people who did vote no to know what actually is being taken away and how much it actually means to the students in this district.
That takes an incredible amount of poise, and she delivered it so well. You can tell you're an actress. So it was incredibly well done. It's nerve-wracking. I'm still nervous when I get up here, and I've done it so many times. And to see someone young and so poised and so articulate, you're going to do wonderful things, and don't give up yet, because we're not done fighting, okay?
The last speaker, Mrs. Wendy Bush.
Another hard act to follow. I'm Wendy Bush, Meadowbrook Drive. As an older person in the community, I would like to recommend to all the older folks to pass the levy. We depend on the kids. They're going to take care of us, I hope. And it's really important. This was a wonderful meeting. I learned a lot. I wish everybody could understand HB 740 or whatever it is. People don't understand that. One person that I was recommending to vote for the levy said, well, the Supreme Court said the state should be paying for it, so I'm not going to. Well, okay. But anyway, it is very important. And as far as the theater group, my own kids went to South to the whole thing, and I have one granddaughter who's in the theater part at South, and last year their production, they went to something called the Dazzle Awards at this downtown at Playhouse Square. It's a wonderful thing, and there were 28 schools from the area that competed for about 11 categories of things involved in a school. They won 4 of them, which is amazing out of all those schools. They just did a wonderful job. So keep it up and vote.
Just making sure that you have no more, Mr. Parkinson, correct? Thank you. Whoops, let me get to my... Well, the next meeting of this Board of Education will be on December, I finally got it, December 9th, right here at the administration building at 7 p.m. I don't know whether we'll be upstairs or downstairs, but we'll be here to accommodate as many people as possible. It is now time to approve the consent calendar. Item 8A. Is there a motion?
Madam President,
Mrs. Zern.
make the motion to approve item 8A, adoption of the consent calendar.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern. Is there a second? Mr. Jones. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve Resolution 8A, adoption of the consent calendar. Is there any discussion? Just making sure that item was removed. Thank you. No other discussion. Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes, motion has carried. Is there any press here tonight? They were tired after Sunday night. Wow. Are you here? Would you like to say anything? Ask anything? No? Okay. I am now looking for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Mrs. Kuczynski. Did I say it wrong? Oh, good. Thank you, Mrs. Kuczynski. Is there a second? Dr. Beal. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn this meeting. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you for coming, and be careful out there. Is there a snow day tomorrow?